This is Michelle from michellesmidheaven.com, and today I'm going to talk about the most significant developments in the astrology of 2025. And I'm going to approach this in a way that takes us through the natural ups and downs of the moon's journey through the zodiac and the Syzygies specifically, which are the new and the full moons, because they are going to point to which transits are activated at what time. And we know that we don't feel the transits all the time. So I'm going to go for the ebbs and flows here, pointing to the planetary aspects that will come to the foreground, when they will do that, and in what kind of context of the new or full moon. That will have an impact on the interpretation as well. And for a personal forecast, of course, I always recommend booking a reading with me, but I think that if you follow along with this video, keeping in mind your own birth chart, you'll be able to see how this might affect you personally. And I'll be saying things in a general way so that you can imagine what these big chapters of the year will bring to your personal experiences. Okay, let's go. We enter the new year shortly after the new moon in Capricorn on December 30th. And as soon as the moon moves into Aquarius after that, she's going to activate the first big transit of the year, which is the Mars-Pluto opposition on January 3rd. This is the second one in a series of 3 oppositions, but it is the first one on the Leo-Aquarius axis. Mars is retrograde and on its way to Cancer. We can think of it as Mars absorbing some of Pluto's agenda in Aquarius. Oppositions often manifest the extremes of both sides, and certainly in this case, when the more extreme planets Mars and Pluto are involved. They already represent a high degree of intensity, and their exact aspect on January 3rd can point to a manifestation of willpower. We might have the impression that we need to defend our personal view and take preemptive action and fight others or rebel against a certain situation. There's probably some frustration around that time as well, since Mars will be retrograde, losing some of his autonomy, and that might disrupt his focus a bit. The retrograde motion might make it harder to channel anger and direct it towards something more constructive. Anger, as well as other martial significations such as action, decision-making, focus, defense, intention, might be misdirected somehow and become more intense as the moon is gaining more and more light around that time. It's good to be aware of this transit, because all of that martial energy might be thrown at the wrong person. So directing our willpower and energy towards the most helpful and constructive areas in our life may take some extra effort. Instead of jumping into action, we have to think twice about what we're doing. On the other hand, it's also a great time to notice how past decisions have impacted our current situation. On January 6th, Mars is returning to the sign of Cancer, which is the moon sign. So this is where Mars might revisit and reactivate the Cancer house topics in the natal chart, but also family matters in general. I also think of the moon as a significant relationship planet in general. And so anything that needs to be mended here, maybe from the last time that Mars journeyed through Cancer, is going to be underlined by the full moon in Cancer on January 13th. What stands out here is a trine between Mars and Neptune that was perfected just the day before the full moon on January 12th. In this very watery chart, Venus is gradually moving closer to Saturn in Pisces, indicating themes of commitments towards others. And you'll notice how almost all of the traditional planets, except for Jupiter, are in feminine, receptive signs, again, underlining the theme of sensing what's going on in our environment and accepting the responsibility to fulfill our social obligations. This full moon is overcome by Venus and Saturn and is That's about social wisdom, you could say, and lovingly taking our responsibility, making important choices that not only benefit ourselves, but the willingness also to adapt to other people's needs. I think that's highlighted here. The trine aspect between Mars and Neptune suggests the ability to be compassionate and to have a change of heart through experiences that stir up warm, passionate feelings of oneness and connection. And here we could see the new moon then in Aquarius as the official inauguration of Pluto in Aquarius. Notice how the so-called malefic planets Mars and Saturn are in an aversion to this new moon. And we see that the greater benefic planet Jupiter is very much involved in this syzygy. And he's making an aspect, a trine aspect within 3 degrees to the new moon. On February 4th, Jupiter stations direct at 11 degrees of Gemini. And the good news is that Jupiter will remain on a direct course for most of the rest of the year. I should say good news in general, but in Gemini, of course, Jupiter has a hard time being himself as he wants to bring order in a chaos of information. And that can be a little bit overwhelming and impact the nervous system, at least in the first half of the year until Jupiter moves into Cancer. Now, with all the water and air in this chart, there's a beautiful balance between mind and heart. It's a moment of big optimistic ideas fueled by the magical alchemical emotions that help construct the future. It's a healthy mix here of reason and feelings. So when you're planting the new moon seeds in Aquarius, notice how it is founded on a very optimistic vision. Saturn is enjoying the company of an exalted Venus who is about to conjoin Neptune. This is a perfect time to dream, and again, don't forget to support your dreams and ideas with the power of emotion as you meditate on what Pluto's mission is in the house of Aquarius in your chart. So what kind of visions do you have for Pluto, and how can Pluto transform what is going on there in your chart? Ruler Saturn is bona fide, supported by an exalted Venus here, so we can be full-on optimistic here. Remember that Pluto is the god of wealth, and now in Aquarius, he's bringing us something that we haven't experienced before, but it is some kind of treasure that we're going to discover in the area where Aquarius falls in the chart. How to let that unfold in the most positive way is something that we can deliberately dream about at the time of this new moon. And I think it's actually very important to do this because the seeds we plant here might have an impact on the eclipses that will be coming later in March. But first, there is a full moon in Leo, and this comes after Venus has moved into Aries on February 4th. And you'll notice how Venus is already slowing down to turn retrograde here on March 2nd. Now, 2025 is going to be a crucial year for the Aries topics in our charts. And the ingress of Venus into Aries is the first big activation of that, of everything that is going to happen there throughout the rest of the year, I would say. Venus, a planet of love, relationships, harmony, pleasure, and creativity, will be prompted to actively assert herself in the sign of her detriment, Aries. She's taking or using some of Mars's powers and skills to further her agenda. Venus has the courage to strive for her ideals together with other people or despite other people. Venus offers her help and support and gives to other people without their desire or permission as well. The focus on others is strong here and could become so strong that it becomes some kind of obsession. Again, with Mars retrograde in Cancer, the intentions are focused on those around us rather than ourselves. But we need to check in with ourselves from time to time. Are we really helping, or are we meddling in other people's business? Sometimes when Venus transits in such an intensive way here as she's going to station retrograde there's a fine line there. As long as we're aware of potential dynamics like a tendency to overfunction or become obsessed with something, not necessarily with other people, but just with anything that we're interested in, or we got to be aware of any type of clingy behavior. If we are aware of that, then we can do great things in cooperation with others as well as whatever we have on our individual agenda. Now, here's a new moon in Pisces that starts off the first eclipse season of the year. Mars is stationed direct and is making a trine aspect to Saturn. This really is greasing the wheels for what's to come, because I think this might be the start of the busiest period of the year. Springtime is on its way in the Northern Hemisphere, and the season of spring is martial in itself when you think of the power and amount of energy needed to make seeds sprout and grow. This powerful environment is also responsible for our natural tendency around that time to approach life with more vigor and enthusiasm than usual. The optimism and eagerness to go after the things that inspire us and the things we're passionate about, that's all going to come up. I think that the trine aspect between Mars and Saturn supports that atmosphere because the Mars-Saturn trine helps with taking new initiatives, right? And steadily pursuing goals. Mars will still be very intense, maybe a little clumsy around that time because Mars is still gaining more and more speed since stationing direct on February 24th at 17 degrees of Cancer. At the same time, Mars is dealing with his guest, Venus, who is going to station retrograde. And she's already on the 10th degree of Aries, where she will halt and reverse course on March 2nd. This is important because as eclipse season is starting, Venus happens to be stationing only a degree away from where the sun will soon be eclipsed. But first, we have a lunar eclipse to deal with in Virgo. During this eclipse, it's Mercury's turn to station retrograde, and again, it's pretty amazing how this will happen on the very degree now where the solar eclipse falls at 9 degrees of Aries. You can see how much pressure there is on Aries. And Aries is, of course, ruled by Mars, and Mars is in Cancer, governed by an eclipsed moon right now. This is very significant in the sense that everything is coming together here. There's an incredible intensity added to the topics signified by Virgo, Aries, Pisces, and Cancer in the chart. Generally speaking, it might bring up twists of fate and delays of very concrete, practical issues that need to be organized and arranged, maybe concerning family events or any type of business that requires a lot of initiative and organization. This looks like a rearrangement where we need to be very flexible. Since Mars is still moving very slowly, its engagement with Saturn, and an engagement is an applying aspect within 3 degrees, so this is when the aspect is the most expressive. Mars's engagement with Saturn is going to start on March 18th and won't perfect until April 5th. Even though there can still be a bit of frustration as Mars is still moving slowly, their extended connection paints the picture of steady progress and great productivity. Their long trine engagement here will support your efforts to make work of what's going on in the houses where Cancer and Pisces fall. But I would also think of it in general terms. and that this aspect can also be very helpful for accomplishing any of your ambitions in the long run. It's very powerful. Finally, here is our solar eclipse of the season, and this will be the last solar eclipse in Aries. This is the big finish line. Everything that has been happening in your chart over the Aries Libra axis since April 2023 is now coming to an end, and this is the big final, you could say. Of course, an eclipse has a long-term effect, and in view of other things that are going to happen in Aries, this is, let's say, for the rest of the year, this is truly a big final. And we can think of Aries and Libra as the axis where we're weighing what's worth fighting for and what we ought to let go. What can we control? What do we have power over? And what is in the hands of others? Freedom, assertiveness, and constructive conflict versus the art of diplomacy and compromise, while not forgetting who you are. In the past years, how did we create our own personal future while at the same time balancing that with the viewpoints and needs of the people around us? It's nice to take a moment to reflect on that, to meditate on that. And in many ways, Aries Libra is the axis where we struggle with willpower and autonomy, of when and how to break free, as well as with an understanding that true happiness is a harmony and involves a deep connection with other people. This powerful new moon that eclipses the sun might be a perfect time to contemplate if there are ways to feel energized and emboldened by means of helping others find their inner strength. And I say that because the location of the eclipse is so close to the degree where Venus stationed retrograde, and she is now with Neptune. Now, to me, that carries the message of our inseparable link with others. It's about finding strength within and being noble enough to truly see other people and to understand them with openness and compassion. Neptune moves into Aries the day after the solar eclipse. It's a very exciting time for us to see such a big ingress relatively shortly after Pluto's ingress into Aquarius. So for the next 13 years, we'll get to know Neptune in Aries. And yes, again, Aries planets or Aries topics in our charts are being activated in a major way. I think it's significant that the ingress happens while Mars is still in Cancer, because we could say that Mars in Cancer and Neptune have an overlapping theme, and that is a deeply emotional theme. Mars might bring some focus to the dreamy perspective of Neptune. Mars is always ready to make sacrifices, but now Neptune brings a compassionate element to Mars's home. And in the ingress chart, Mars is in Cancer, which anchors the start of Neptune's journey and a sort of passionate receptiveness and the ambition or desire to take care of others. Maybe not always for the best reasons, though, because Neptune also has a deceptive side, and we might not see the truth of what is really going on. Another significant placement that's embedded in the ingress chart is the combination of Venus and Saturn in Pisces, which expresses a sense of responsibility for other people's well-being. Retrograde Venus is on her way to meet Saturn, and I'll talk more about that later, because that's a long transit. Saturn also perfects a sextile aspect to Uranus on April 4th, and that suggests the possibility of ending outdated patterns, whether those are thought patterns or behavioral patterns that can be replaced with new, innovative conceptualizations and ways of doing things. it's good to look at the topics that will be activated in your chart so that you can prepare. Otherwise, Saturn-Uranus might even bring a bit of a shock as Uranus tries to force a breakthrough. Since they're forming a sextile, there's a constructive cooperation, though. It's the kind of aspect that blesses us with more freedom after we put in the necessary work. The full moon in Libra brings Venus's journey into focus once again, and you'll notice how she's spending a lot of time with Saturn as she is stationing direct at 24 degrees of Pisces within an hour of the full moon here. Even though this full moon is not an eclipse, this entire cycle started with a solar eclipse on the point where Venus first stationed retrograde. So this is very much a Venusian cycle that could bring some drama or upheaval in relationships. The full moon's first aspect is a square to Mars, which suggests conflict in relationships or a dynamic shift that requires either more freedom or more commitment, positive commitment. 5 days later, on April 18th, Mars finally moves into Leo. So before that, Mars is finishing up his big journey through Cancer, tying any loose ends that are lingering there. On April 20th, then, Mars makes his second trine to Neptune this year, but this time it happens in fire signs, which means that there's a lot more action involved in the heat of the moment. So there's also more caution needed so that our actions are not too impulsive. Overall, this syzygy in Libra emphasizes the need for balance in our relationships, and since the Venus-Saturn combination points to serious commitments and social contracts with others, this can also be a big step forward in some of our relationships. The cardinal or tropical signs are very much activated, and they are like pivots or turning points where sudden change is possible. This dynamic is activated big time. There's a lot of power behind this, in particular because Mars is making its final opposition to Pluto on April 27th. So if there are any decisions that need to be made in your current relationships, this full moon could be a point of completion where you get to do what you need to do. Mercury continued his direct course on April 7th, and by the time the new moon in Taurus happens, we find Mercury very close to the degree of the recent solar eclipse. All the activity in Aries could signify long-term things going on in that area of your chart. There's such a big story forming around those topics, and in particular when you have natal planets in Aries. Mars is now in the process of activating all of that again through a trine to these Aries planets, which is good because Mars is in fact the god who wants to find solutions for problems and wants to set things in motion. Mars is still picking up speed, and he's still in the shadow degrees he traveled through before, but he's very eager now to get things done, and maybe sometimes a little bit too recklessly, although that is gradually going to improve. Venus is finally separating from her long conjunction with Saturn and getting ready to move into Aries again, which is a sign of her detriment. And so there is more activity for Aries yet again around this period. This new moon, even though she's exalted in Taurus, may carry the energy that we feel after some tough decisions have been made. There might be some heaviness involved, but it's like we've put something behind us here, and now we're moving on to a fresh start. Off we go to the full moon in Mars' sign Scorpio, and guess what? Venus is very close to the degree of her retrograde station and the recent solar eclipse, and Mercury station in Mars' other sign, Aries. Ruler Mars is making a whole sign square to this syzygy, in the sun's sign of Leo. And as the ruler of the moon, Mars has a prominent role to play here. It's a moment of steady progress. And then on May 25th, Saturn moves into Aries to conjoin Neptune once again. And this time, this combination will have a more outward going flavor where both Saturn and Neptune will need some time to adapt to a new environment. They're not used to this environment. Saturn has its fall in Aries, which means that there's going to be a long process of adaptation. We can expect a lot of adjustments in that area of life where Saturn is in its fall. And that could start us off from a difficult low point where it might feel like we have to climb a mountain. And fortunately, Saturn is the master of mountain climbing. Times are changing and we'll get swept away by events that we have no control over, whether we like it or not. But with so much emphasis on fire this year, our individual willpower is truly unbeatable. 2025 is a do-it-yourself year. Aries ruler Mars, looking at Saturn and Neptune from a trine, is in a good place now to offer all of the energy and support that we need. This is only a first taste we're getting of a long transit. Both Saturn and Neptune will move back into Pisces later this year. But first, the moon moves into Gemini to meet up with the sun at 6 degrees. And this new moon is blessed by not only the great benefic Jupiter, but also Gemini's domicile ruler Mercury is there. This is a very harmonious new moon with sextile aspects to both the malefic planets and a trine to Pluto, which seems a wonderful time to set intentions because this creative new moon supports productivity and allows things to run smoothly. It will be easy for us to feel inspired. There's a lot of resourcefulness here. It's a busy and action-driven chart. All of the planets are in masculine signs, so there's a big outward movement. In other words, this is a good time to get stuff done in general. A fiery full moon in Sagittarius then follows on June 11th, and this might be a really successful completion of the creative intentions that we had at the start of the lunation cycle. Just before the full moon, Jupiter entered Cancer, the sign where Jupiter is an honored guest. And Cancer is Jupiter's exaltation, and now there's a mutual reception between Jupiter and the moon, greasing the wheel of good fortune. This is truly a beautiful lunar cycle, as we can also see that Venus has entered Taurus. That happened on June 6th. It's wonderful to have both of the benefics in signs where they are well dignified. It means that they're able to make things run smoothly for us so that whatever we're doing at that time is likely to cost us a lot less effort. This looks like a wonderful time to travel and go on vacation and to enjoy the company of friends and family. The days leading up to June 15th, on the other hand, might prove to be a little more stressful as Mars is squaring Uranus, breaking through the fixity and stability of the Leo-Taurus square. It's a tell it like it is moment that will be echoed by Jupiter and Saturn as they complete their series of opening squares on June 15th. And since they're both on a direct course, and since this lunation cycle is so auspicious, I see this final square as a very formative and dynamic aspect that delivers a lot of energy and stick-to-itiveness to bring about overall positive, encouraging developments that offer growth, exploration, discovery, and self-confidence through faith and steady perseverance. We could say the gentle times continue as the new moon unfolds in Cancer, which is, of course, the moon's home sign. And she's conjoining the sun within 1 degree of an exalted Jupiter. What a beautiful, inspiring new beginning. Blessed by a sextile from Venus, still in her domicile in Taurus. And I would say the only potential setback here is a superior square from Saturn, who is, of course, in its fallen Aries. But Saturn is also very close to Neptune on that day, and this almost gives this strangeness or otherworldly imagination to the things that you're dreaming into being for this new moon. It's okay to reach very far and to come up with an idealistic vision, as there is the promise of Saturn to make it real. This is such a creative new moon, and with that Saturnian flavor to it, I would say that this is an excellent time to use some of that Saturnian self-discipline to meditate and for any type of cleansing rituals that involve water to ward off negative energy and start the new cycle with a clean slate. It's a great time for rituals with the energy of the solstice still fresh. We might receive important messages through dreams or sudden insights, as we also see a really nice sextile aspect that is forming between Mercury and Uranus. And speaking of Uranus, here's our next big ingress of the year coming up. Uranus is entering Gemini on July 7th and will hang out there for 4 months before revisiting Taurus. This is another big one, and I'm excited for this because in Mercury's sign, Uranus is really opening up possibilities that allow us to be innovative, think outside the box, get rid of any old assumptions, and so on. Can it also be a little too much? Yes, certainly. It's a very nervous combo where it's hard to calm down all of that buzzing of the mind. Uranus feels like an electric surge through the nervous system, but it's an inspiring ingredient here that will make life more interesting and more absurd, perhaps, in the strangest ways. In the meantime, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is still going on. It's a slow process, and together with Pluto, they're going to make harmonious aspects to Uranus, emphasizing the importance of this big ingress that will shape our future in all things Gemini. The full moon in Capricorn is sure to pick up some of the Saturn-Neptune energy, and this entire cycle that started with the new moon in Cancer could actually revolve around interesting, mysterious, unconventional, and otherworldly experiences. In Capricorn, the full moon, amidst all the strangeness that might be going on around that time in the world, is able to anchor the circumstances into earthy pragmatism so that we can ground ourselves again in the here and now, but in a way that allows for enigmatic visions and even mystical experiences. It's a good time to take a pause if you can, to wind down and turn inward for a moment as the rest of the cycle continues, because we want to be prepared for what's next. As we move on to the new moon in Leo, we see it's going to happen in a powerful opposition to Pluto, a sextile to Uranus, as well as a trine to Saturn, Neptune. So this new moon and the entire lunation cycle for this month is going to revolve around all of the things we're noticing with these modern planets that have now moved into new signs this year. This is where I see a story come together, right? Where it will be much clearer during this cycle what these planets are setting in motion in Aquarius, Aries, and Gemini. This new lunation in Leo is going to shed some light on that. And with the sun in Leo, this is all about the main storyline, the mission, or the agenda of these planets. Whatever gifts and tasks they are bringing for you personally will become more clear this month. And it's definitely a big new start because this syzygy is close to the point where Mars stationed retrograde, remember? It's a start or even a revolution of some kind that is responded to with the power of creativity with clear intent in Leo. This is when we decide intuitively and more clearly what feels empowering in our life and what gives us a strong sense of purpose. And we'll need to find the power within to really commit to our individual declaration of purpose. Saturn stations retrograde during this cycle as well, and that's important because the full moon is going to be ruled by Saturn. And by this time, of course, we can no longer think of Saturn without thinking of Neptune and also Saturn's connections to Uranus and Pluto. Amidst all of this, there's also an opposition between Mars and the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And by the way, Saturn and Neptune are very close, but their actual conjunction isn't going to happen until February 2026. This opposition is happening over the Libra-Aries axis. So once again, Aries will be activated in a major way in the month of August. This can have quite an impact. I think of Mars-Saturn oppositions as a crushing or pounding energy, and it can feel much like an attack, since there's usually little that we can do about it. Neptune is likely to bring a lot of confusion to the mix at this time. Mars and Saturn are both malefic planets, and they're debilitated here. Mars is in detriment, Saturn is depressed. There's a mixed mutual reception, but I think that only eases their collaboration. It doesn't necessarily put a positive spin on it. Now, the fact that Saturn is retrograde might take off some of the pressure, and since Mars is direct and ruling Saturn, there's more of a martial energy to this aspect, making the events that may come about quick and swift. The silver lining here is a blissful Venus-Jupiter conjunction that is happening in Cancer, and their benefic influence on Mars is very, very strong. A good way to deal with this situation is to get your ducks in a row in advance as best as you can. And again, stick to your declaration of individual purpose at the beginning of this cycle. Prove your worth. Both Mars and Saturn like strategy and preparation, so make sure that you're ready to jump into action when necessary. Let's proceed to the new moon in the first degree of Virgo. And this could almost have been a solar eclipse because the south node is in Virgo, but the luminaries are still at a distance from the node, so there's not going to be a solar eclipse here. But this is the beginning of eclipse season because it is initiating the run-up to the lunar eclipse later that month. In Mercury's sign, it is interesting to note that Mercury's other guest Uranus is making a square to this new moon. With the eclipses coming up, we can expect some surprises during this lunation cycle, as well as some revaluations that need to be made as Saturn moves back into Pisces on September 1st. And that's significant because it looks like Saturn hurries back into Pisces just in time to join the moment of the lunar eclipse. This is when we need to remember what happened in September 2024, when there was a lunar eclipse that happened near Saturn at 25 degrees of Pisces. This particular eclipse might reawaken that moment, but in a much more positive way, because this time the ruler of Pisces, Jupiter, is in a much better position. Jupiter is ruling the eclipsed moon from its exaltation in Cancer, and once again, Jupiter and the moon form a mutual reception. So Jupiter's promise of growth and ease supports the moon. It's also good to have Mercury in his own domicile and exaltation, Virgo. And since the moon is the host to such a powerful guest and the eclipse is going to happen so close to the North Node, there might be some good luck, growth, and success involved here. We move forward now to our second new moon in Virgo, and this is quite exceptional. Not only is it relatively rare to have two new moons in the same zodiac sign, but this new moon is also going to be a solar eclipse. We could say that the first new moon planted the seed, while the second new moon now strengthens the root system. Virgo themes are underlined in a major way because of this, and there's even more to it because the last degree of a sign is the anaretic degree, which again emphasizes the weight of all the topics that Virgo represents in your birth chart. The mutual reception between Venus and Mercury facilitates this powerful new beginning that could have to do with the development of a plan, providing a strategy and organization of all the intricacies of what is unfolding in your life. It could already entail the big picture shift that is about to happen on the Virgo Pisces axis in your chart. So it's a great time to get organized and plan strategies here based on whatever new things the solar eclipse brings into the mix here. Opposed by Saturn, but already separating from Saturn, this new beginning could be a deliberate moving away from the past, out of Saturnian necessity, or any types of frustrations that are lingering from the previous lunation cycle that also started in Virgo. Having two new moons in Virgo is likely like a second chance, right? We can navigate this with our mercurial skills, using our common sense and the ability to stay grounded through experimenting with new approaches and through being flexible enough to start over when needed. It's a time of intelligent and creative discovery that opens new doors to incremental accomplishments over the next eclipse seasons over the Virgo Pisces axis. As the moon gains light and becomes full in this intensified cycle, we're revisiting the themes in Aries with fresh eyes this time. Aries, of course, marks a place where so many things have been happening over the past months. So many things have changed, and something comes to a completion now through the full moon. The moon is showing result in this area of your life in a powerful and action-oriented way. The moon is now ruled by a well-dignified Mars in Scorpio, which looks very promising. And Mars is also slowly getting to the end of a very intense cycle here. You'll notice that the sun is slowly catching up with Mars, so that means that Mars is in the process of finishing his cycle with the sun. That will take a while, though. Mercury has also moved into Scorpio now, which I think makes a very helpful combination that allows for a focused, clever planning and efficient work. And by the time we get to the new moon in Libra, Venus will have joined the luminaries in her own domicile, finally leaving behind Virgo, which is the sign of her fall. And this looks like a very sweet new moon, powerfully supported by an exalted Jupiter. The Syzygy enjoys the protection of the benefic guardians in a very clear way. You'll also notice how Mars and Saturn are not involved in this new moon, as they are in an inversion, which is great because it cools down or tempers the Mars-Uranus opposition on November 4th. This lunation cycle is another window of opportunity this year to call in your desires, in particular around relationships and around the social harmony in your environment in general. It's the perfect time to meet new people, and supported by Jupiter as well, I would say, to build your community, to play an active, constructive role in your community. We can allow ourselves to dream of new possibilities of working with other people and really enjoy this time participating in any social activities or starting any type of creative projects where you're trying to beautify your environment and create harmony in some way. Neptune's retrograde ingress shortly after the new moon also provides us with a more creative, imaginative space there. Ruled by an exalted Jupiter, Neptune is happily fueling our optimism. The full moon this month will happen in the moon's exaltation Taurus. And Taurus is, of course, ruled by Venus. So this entire lunar month is Venusian. And we're very fortunate because Venus is still in Libra at this time. Venus takes care of the social fabric in our world, turning connections with others into heartwarming support. Again, it just seems to be the perfect time for connecting with others in a very constructive, pleasurable, fun, lighthearted way. Mercury and Mars have moved into Sagittarius, and we're keeping in mind that they are ruled by a very well-dignified Jupiter. And at that time, they're also making a sextile to a really nice Venus by whole sign. The benefic planets have a big impact here, which supports the positive flow of this lunation cycle. It's a time where spontaneity receives blessings. Good things come from going with the flow and enjoying the simple, easy things in life. It's about finding happiness and joy in the simplest ways. Mercury and Mars make an opposition to Uranus, and despite some potential clumsiness or disruptions, since Mercury is in detriment here, I feel it's mostly contributing to a more imaginative atmosphere. In the meantime, there is something very special going on. You'll notice that there's a trine forming between Jupiter and Saturn, and this is a very interesting situation because a trine is, of course, a very supportive aspect. So it really depicts the best way in which Jupiter and Saturn could be working together. However, since they're both making a trine aspect to the Sun, it means that both Jupiter and Saturn are getting closer to their stationing point. Jupiter is about to station retrograde, while Saturn is getting ready to station direct. And while it looks like they're coming together through a trine, it's not really going to happen. The trine will not perfect or become exact. So there is an element here of frustration. While the moon in Taurus, the exalted full moon, is pointing to some sort of completion, this might actually be a kind of close but no cigar situation where the completion doesn't happen. While there may definitely be a lot of progress, this is a signature of unfinished business. It's a sign of being on the verge of a breakthrough or on the verge of success, but it's not enough. The time isn't ripe just yet. By the time we receive the new moon in Scorpio, the moon's guest Jupiter will have already turned retrograde on November 11th at 25 degrees of Cancer, as well as Mercury, who turned retrograde on November 9th at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. Mercury moves back into Scorpio in time for the new moon happening there. There are 3 retrograde planets involved now in this water trine, with both of the feminine relationship planets, the Moon and Venus, in a difficult spot because they are both debilitated in Scorpio. This might be the start of a lunation cycle that will test our patience. And again, we can see an image of the unfinished business that I talked about with the last full moon, as Uranus has now moved back into Taurus, where the full moon happened. And so it looks like there is still some Uranian business that needs taken care of. And this is echoed by ruler Venus in a whole sign opposition to Uranus. The same theme of unfinished business is also echoed by Neptune, who moved back into Pisces in October, as I mentioned, and this syzygy might initiate a walk down memory lane where we revisit our past experiences in Pisces and Taurus, and I would add Cancer as well, revisiting that long Mars retrograde period in Cancer. This is where we'll get the chance to tie up loose ends. So at the beginning of this lunation cycle, it's good to direct your intentions maybe not to new things or new projects that we want to work on or anything like that. No, this is more about confronting ourselves with and accepting the sometimes unpleasant consequences of past decisions, and we can think of how to tie loose ends and make amends. It's a time of maybe swallowing our pride and reconnecting with, for example, a friend you had a difficult conversation with or something along those lines. The receptiveness of all of these planets and feminine signs is an invitation for more understanding, more compassion, and the difficult task of admitting that maybe we were wrong about some things. It's a good time to be flexible, forgiving, and to set some things straight again while exercising a decent amount of patience. By the time the full moon happens in Gemini, things already look different because we've got a happy bunch over in Sagittarius. The Sun, Mars, and Venus are there, and Mars is applying to square Saturn on December 9th. Saturn turned direct at 25 degrees Pisces on November 28th, and if you remember, there's that degree again of the lunar eclipse of September 2024. And now Saturn is very much supported by Mars as Mars helps Saturn to jump back into action. It's about saying goodbye to some initial frustration or confusion, perhaps, and now the Saturnian locomotive is fired up again by Mars, who is coming closer and closer to the last stages of his synodic cycle with the Sun that started in November 2023. The new Sun-Mars cycle will start on January 9th, 2026, by the way. After goading Saturn into action, Mars is going to move into the sign of its exaltation, Capricorn, that is ruled by Saturn. And in this place, Mars fully commits to Saturn's agenda. It's an overall productive time, ushering in a really lovely new moon witnessed by Mercury and Venus, who are co-present. And they're all making a superior or dominant square to Saturn and Neptune, giving a lot of support to the topics that fall under Pisces. Shortly after the start of this new cycle that will take us into 2026, the moon will conjoin a hardworking Mars who's finishing his 2-year cycle with the Sun. And that seems to be a wonderful way to get us in the new year. Looking at 2025 as a whole, one of the greater patterns that I see here is that there is a strong combination of the elements of water and fire, which in general tends to lend greater strength to our inspiration, our creativity, and our emotions, which will be playing a big role. It could be a more emotional year for us, where we feel our passion and ambitions burn more brightly. And this in turn gives a welcome counterbalance to the more cerebral transits of Uranus and Pluto in the so-called more objective signs of Gemini and Aquarius. I think it's good to have some kind of balance there so that we can find the courage to provide resistance against some of the automatic mechanisms indicated by the modern planets that lie further beyond our personal control. It makes it easier for us not to get carried away in directions that we don't really have an emotional affinity with. The prominence of water and fire in 2025 brings a healthy kind of intensity where we can deal with pressure in a way that is true and authentic and that engages our willpower rather than being a victim of external circumstances. My hope is that everyone will be able to harness that powerful energy and direct it toward the best path possible. Again, if you could use a more personalized interpretation of what's happening in 2025, please consider booking a reading with me on michellesmidheaven.com. And I've got a couple of more places left in December, but I'm already booking into January, so don't wait too long. And in the meantime, I wish you a fantastic end of the year. And I look forward to exploring all of these exciting aspects that I touched on today in more depth on Substack. And you will find my Substack page through my website. You'll find forecasting there. You'll find podcasts there. And please also don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much. Until next time.